I'm up on the top of the ski mountain in this video, outside of Santa Fe, or maybe it's inside of Santa Fe, on the outskirts of Santa Fe. I loved going there when I lived in New Mexico. I filmed the following video after I started watching Jana Yilton's YouTube channel for the first time. Jana is a Swedish artist and filmmaker who I discovered and started watching in 2021 and felt really inspired by her videos to be out in nature even more than I already was, and also to start making little films of my own, of myself talking about my art and about my life. And I really wanted to share my own story, my life story, and how that's influenced my art. I felt really intimidated to do that at first, so I did a lot of test runs and experiments. This is one of the first ones of those that I did, and recently I felt that I wanted to post it online, even though it's about 2 years old now. Enjoy. I've been thinking a lot lately about how do I tell my whole story? How do I be fully transparent and fully honest? And that's really scary for me because, I don't think that I feel like there's a lot of things in my past and in my story that are really difficult and challenging to talk about, and it also has repercussions to it, other people would be affected if I share my whole story, namely my family. But it also feels really important to me, actually really important to share my whole story, because that's what makes me who I am, and it's definitely a part of my art as well. And it's definitely a part of how I make art and why I make the art that I make and why I make it in the way that I make it. And so I guess I'm trying to figure out how to do that. So I feel like that's maybe an art in itself, figuring out how to be transparent and honest, and also in a way that's loving and compassionate to the people involved in the story. So I'm going to try to work on that. And I guess I'll start now, but basically I'm estranged from my whole family at the moment. Pretty much estranged. Estranged sounds like a strong word, but it's a little more nuanced than that, I suppose. But basically my dad was very verbally and emotionally and psychologically abusive to my sisters and my mother and me when we were growing up. And that's what my, a big part of my childhood consists of, that experience. And it was very, very difficult. And I didn't think of it as abuse when I was growing up because it was just, it was so normalized. But I spent a lot of my childhood and early adulthood being really depressed and feeling really lost. And my parents are still together, they're still married. Also, along with the verbal abuse, my mother was really unhappy and miserable and felt trapped in her marriage, and talked about that incessantly with us children, but each one of us privately, not really all three of us together, each of us privately. That's my whole childhood. My relationship with my mother, it feels like that was 90% of what we talked about practically, was how miserable she was, how trapped she felt in her marriage, and how she didn't believe in divorce. So she believed that divorce was not an option because of her religious beliefs, because she says God hates divorce and the Bible says divorce is wrong. And I suspect that she really was also just afraid of being alone and never really lived independently. And I think she also was really afraid of the stigma of divorce and what the neighbors would think and what her family members would think, what her sisters and brothers would think. She just wanted it to look like, on the outside, like she had a happy family, even though it was a big lie. So I guess that's what people used to do, and I am so glad that I think that that's starting to fall apart, that way of being. It's really messed up. It's really destructive for everyone. Yeah. I just want to say that it's maybe seems counterintuitive, but talking about the problems and how messed up things are is the first step to healing. Admitting that your marriage is a disaster and that your husband is abusive and that you're unhappy and miserable, and talking about that, and like to the people you're scared to talk about it with, your sisters and brothers, a therapist, your community, your church community, being really honest about it and reaching out for help is the first place, is the first step towards healing. Pretending that it's, that everything is fine is just gonna make things get worse and worse and worse. And my artwork is all entwined with that story, like completely, because as I started to reach out for help as an adult, and I started reading books about healing, and I started seeing a therapist, and I started to really learn about how to access my body's wisdom and pay attention to the recurring dreams that I was having, and my body sending me messages in all sorts of different ways. I had severe upper back pain that resulted in me having to go to the emergency room, and my neck, I wasn't able to move my neck, and depression, and getting on medication for anxiety, and having a breakdown, and all those things. As I started to pay attention to those things as messages, I started to learn about how to follow my heart. And there's a lot in that story, but really what has been so important to me is learning to access the part of myself that feels like a sense of joy and freedom as I move towards something. And it's amazing, that feeling, and then really honoring that and trusting that feeling and taking action towards those things that feeling is pointing to. And then as you take action, it's this for me, it's been this amazing opening up. That's when the world feels magic, is when you suddenly realize that these doors, things are falling into place, and doors are opening in ways that are just so far beyond coincidence that you have to acknowledge that there's more going on there. And that's been the most amazing experience of my life, just seeing that, watching how that happens, and wanting to pursue that further and further and live that way. There's no going back, I don't think, from once that ball starts rolling and you start to be following your heart in that way. I can't say enough about that. And Yana Yunton is doing that also, and it's amazing to watch her do that. I think she's much better at it than I am. That's why I feel so inspired by her, but it's really beautiful to see her do that. And anyways, but my art has been all about that as well. It's been a complete parallel process. Completely. My art journey, there's a long story in that, but basically, what I think happens for a lot of people is that when they're little, they play and they're making art and having a lot of fun with it. And then as people get older, they get put in art classes and then they get told like what's good art and what's bad art and what their art should look like. And it's this big messy process of like internally judging your own art, and then the playfulness gets lost and the joy gets lost. And I think people pretty much ubiquitously get really confused and lose their joy about what art is and how to do it and just how to love it and how to make it. And a lot of people, I think, give up on it after a while. And I did that too. And I went through that whole process and gave away all my art supplies and felt really burnout and jaded and sad about art. And then as I went through my healing process, I realized like at a certain point, I need art. I need art in my life. And I started making art in a totally different way. I started making art just because I enjoyed doing it and loved it. And I had a little sketchbook, and I just felt this like craving, like this need just to be doing sketches. Like I just felt it. It didn't matter what they looked like. I just needed to be doing them. And they were terrible at first. And I could totally hear that internal critic saying like, why are you doing that? Like, that's not good. Why do you think you're an artist? Like, I can't believe you're still trying to draw. I remember those days, when it was really hard to ignore that voice, and I just had to be like, thank you. I'm gonna keep doing this because I need it, and I could feel that I needed it. And just starting to tell myself like, wow, this is what my sketch looks like today. This is how I'm showing up today. This is what's coming out of me today. How cool. It doesn't matter what it looks like. I mean, it does matter, but it matters in a different kind of way. It matters because it's beautiful to see what came out of me that day. Like, this is what's in me today. It may look like, a mess, but it's so awesome to see on the page what's going on inside me today. And I felt all these synchronicities take place when I started doing that, like people just walking up to me in public, random strangers like thanking me for sketching and how beautiful it was to see me sketching. That kept happening. It just felt so good. And I finally was able to start ignoring that inner critic and started connecting so much more with that joyful part of me that I could feel much more deeply inside me. That was like just healing from the process of making art, no matter what it looked like. Just that healing part of me that was just like, thank you for sketching, thank you. And I just went with that. And I just kept paying attention, and I could feel the energy inside me. And my story goes that when I draw faces, and particularly when I drew faces, I felt that energy so strong in me, more strong when I drew faces than when I drew other things. And I just went with that. And then I started making larger and larger portraits, and I just felt that like joyful feeling of, yes, this is it. That kind of feeling. And that all came from my own healing process and learning how to heal, learning how to connect with my inner wisdom and my heart and my somatic guidance, which just means body guidance. I think that's a whole language of its own to learn. That our culture ignores most of the time, and we end up depressed or addicted or all kinds of problems, ill, physically and mentally and spiritually and medically ill as a result. And so I'm trying to experiment with making a video and being really honest, and I'm just gonna try it out. I don't have a drone, but maybe I'll get one. And I don't even have a nice camera. I don't have any of that stuff. But we'll see what happens. And anyways, right now I'm in the final phase of art therapy school, and that's been a very confusing journey for me, mostly because I don't know, that doesn't really feel like my path. So I'm not sure what will happen, but I really want to keep making my art, and I think that I really, really, really want to tell my whole story, and that's all of a sudden feels like so important to me to do that. It just feels so important to claim that and to take ownership of my whole story. The abuse I experienced as a child, my estrangement from my family, the depression and the breakdown I went through in my 20s, mid 20s, mid and late 20s, and how difficult that was, and how that all feeds into my art, and it's made me who I am, and it's my life. So I'm gonna practice telling that story and being really honest about it, and we'll see. I hope I can do that in a way that is respectful and also honest. So that's all for now, I guess.